place on the record that we may seek to make a further submission to you in regards to that ruling.
I would welcome further submissions, but on that we will move to question time, and I call Senator Ayres.
My question is to the Minister for Finance, Senator Birmingham. Can the minister confirm that real wages are predicted to go backwards by 1.5% this year, even more than the Morrison government's last budget anticipated?
The Minister for Finance, Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. I thank Senator Ayres for his question. Mr President, the budget papers do set out the impacts of what we are seeing are global shocks and disruptions in relation to pressures on inflation in Australia and right around the world. The shocks, the aftershocks of COVID-19 that are causing disruptions to global supply chains, but most notably the terrible, tragic war that Russia is inflicting upon Ukraine at present, have had enormous implications for inflationary pressures right around the world. Those opposite may not want to acknowledge the fact that oil price spikes are a real inflationary factor, but they are a real inflationary factor. Senator Ayres spoke about the change in relation to inflation figures since the previous budget. Well, of course, since the previous budget we have seen huge spikes in oil prices, which have a very direct impact in relation to there being higher inflation. Our government's responding to these pressures that Australians face. We're responding in terms of providing a 22-cent a litre reduction in the fuel excise, lowering petrol prices for Australians while this spike is in place, while the world moves through these terrible difficulties caused by what's happening in Ukraine, providing additional support to low, middle, fixed-income Australians. And why are we able to do that, Mr President? We're able to do it because our government's created a strong economy that's got more Australians in jobs, a strong economy that's provided a stronger budget position that's enabling us to have lower deficits, lower debt, but also provide additional support for Australians when they need it. Additional support for Australian households, additional support for Australian motorists, farmers and businesses to ensure they get the help they deserve.
Your time has expired. Senator Ayres, a supplementary question.
I take it that's a yes. Can the minister confirm an average Australian worker will be $1,355 worse off this financial year thanks to real wages going backwards under this government again?
Order. Minister.
Mr President, I addressed the impact of inflation before, and it's set out in the budget papers in relation to that interaction between inflation and wage rises. Now, the wage price index is forecast to grow to 3.25% in the new financial year starting 1 July, following the provision of these additional supports that we're providing. It then grows further to 3.5%, real wages growth put out into the future. Senator Ayres, though, Mr President, also asked about the dollar value for Australians in different circumstances. Well, when it comes to take-home pay for Australians, Mr President, there are many factors at play. And when it comes to take-home pay, our income tax cuts play a very big factor, Mr President. They play a very big factor. That someone earning around $90,000, Mr President, under the Labor Party would have been paying $21,200 in income tax, but under the Liberal and National parties are paying $18,600, Mr President, a very significant addition to their take-home pay.
Order on my left. Senator O'Neill. Senator Ayres, a second supplementary.
Well, I'd ask the minister, when he's answering this question, maybe to be a little bit less smug. There's aged care workers up there for whom no provision has been made in the budget for an increase in their wages. Given 52 out of 55 of the government's wage forecasts have been wrong in the past, and real wages went backwards at a higher rate than even the government's last budget anticipated, why on earth should Australians believe anything that you promise on wages on the eve of an election?
Order. Minister.
Well, Mr President, Australians should have faith because we've demonstrated an ability to increase the take-home pay of Australians by cutting their income taxes, We've demonstrated the ability to increase the ability of Australians to earn a wage by creating more jobs. 1.7 million more jobs under our government, Mr President, that have been created during our time in office. 1.7 million more Australians who have the opportunity to work, the opportunity to earn an income, the opportunity to support their families, and thanks to our income tax cuts, get to take more of that pay home as well, Mr President. Now, those opposite I see like to come and they'll grandstand in relation to hard-working aged care workers. I know that they will do that, Mr President. I've seen their calls to say they believe there should be an increase in wages for aged care workers. But will they put a number on that? No, Mr President. They don't have the guts. They won't put a number on it. They won't budget a cent for it in their election campaign promises because they're all just hollow rhetoric with no real action.
Order. Order. Senator Scarr.
Mr President, my question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Birmingham. Can the Minister please outline how the Liberal and National Government's budget delivers an economic plan to secure a stronger economy and create a stronger future for all Australians?
The Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Birmingham.
Thanks very much, Mr President. Well, Mr President, I thank Senator Scarr for his interest, and I know the interest of every single Liberal and National and country Liberal senator in this place who are committed and dedicated to creating opportunities for Australians in a stronger economy. And last night our government handed down a budget that delivers a plan for a stronger future, that delivers a long-term economic plan to continue the growth in jobs and our economy that is world-leading, that delivers record investments in essential services and necessary and essential investment in our defence and national security. It creates a stronger, more secure Australia. It's a budget that recognises the challenges we've come through from COVID-19 and that we now face in a more uncertain and contested world. It's a budget that recognises the pressures households are feeling right now, which is why we are taking the dividends of a stronger economy to reduce debt, to reduce deficits compared with what had been previously forecast. It's why we're also taking some of those dividends to help ease the pressures on Australian households, to ensure that 22-cent a litre cut in the petrol excise, which will save around $15 every time an Australian goes to fill up their car, and of course provides additional benefits to hard-working parents who have to run around to work, to school, to sport, provides additional benefits to those in regional Australia who have further distances to drive and for whom these impacts are greater. It provides additional support to low, middle, fixed-income Australians by lifting the tax offset provisions, by providing one-off payments to help people get through the temporary spikes that we are seeing in relation to cost of living. But of course it does much more in terms of our plans for the future. It helps first homeowners get more first home buyers into the market. It provides additional support for the provision of housing across the board. Mr President, this is a plan that shows we continue to support Australians in every aspect of their lives.
Minister, your time has expired. Order, Senator Watt. Order. Senator Scarr, a supplementary question.
I thank the Minister for that outstanding answer. What steps is the government taking to address labour shortages to ensure Australia's strong economic recovery continues into the future?
Minister.
Mr President, this is a budget that backs Australians, their enterprise, their aspirations. Past 2 years have been tough, but our recovery is world-leading. It's ahead of the US, it's ahead of the UK, it's ahead of Canada, much of Europe or Japan. Mr President, Labor themselves, I hear lots of interjections, held jobs up as being the big test for the government in terms of how we manage the crisis. That's what Mr Chalmers said and nearly everybody else over there said. And, Mr President, we have delivered in spades. Unemployment is headed to a 50-year low. A 50-year low, Mr President, at 4%, headed to 3.75%, creating opportunities to get young Australians into skilled, secure jobs. During the pandemic, we invested some $13 billion in skills and training. The results speak for themselves. A record 220,000 Australians are now in trade apprenticeships. the highest number since records
Senator
began,
Thorpe.
and last night laid the foundations for even more young Australians to get an
Minister.
opportunity in an apprenticeship
Minister,
and in training.
Your time has expired. Senator Scarr, a second supplementary.
Thank you, Mr President, and I thank the Minister for another outstanding answer. I give him another opportunity. Excellent. How will the government's long-term plan for a stronger future help businesses and manufacturers and ensure Australians have the services and the supports they need and deserve?
Minister.
Mr President, small businesses are at the heart of our economy. Nearly 8 million Australians are employed in small businesses. That's why our government delivered lower tax rates for small businesses, the lowest tax rates in 50 years for Australian small businesses. And this budget builds on that support, providing more tax incentives for small businesses to invest in skilling their workforce, more tax incentives for small business to invest in the digital technologies to uplift their productivity and their capabilities. It's a budget also that invests in securing our supply chains as a nation, in manufacturing. We will see the first mRNA vaccine manufacturing facility in the Southern Hemisphere built in Australia. There's additional support for our universities, for CSIRO and industry to ensure the rapid commercialisation of different products innovated in Australia, and an extension of our patent box tax reforms to make sure that innovations that happen in Australia can be commercialised in Australia and manufactured in Australia, creating more job opportunities for more Australians into the future.
Minister. Senator Gallagher.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister for Finance, Senator Birmingham. Minister, the budget contains $3 billion worth of secret cuts. What are they?
The Minister for Finance, Senator Birmingham.
Thank you, Mr President. I'm sorry that Senator Gallagher has asked that question. I thought it was just the foolishness of Mr Chalmers in relation to pursuing this claim of secret cuts somehow. As I've already addressed publicly, Mr President, this budget, I'm happy, Senator Wong, to repeat it here, that clearly the failings on your side in the ability to read the budget paper, there is a reduction, Mr President. Yeah, Senator Watt's holding it up. Go and have a look at his screen. It says a reduction in decisions taken but not yet announced. Guess why, Mr President? Because we've announced them, Mr President. Because we've announced them. There's your answer, Senator Gallagher, that in important areas like women's safety, we had made a provision in my EFO for women's safety. We made the provision for women's safety. Now we've announced the spending on women's safety, a very important provision that we put in place in this budget. We did the same, Mr President, in areas of apprenticeship reform. We made a provision in my EFO, and now we've announced the spending on apprenticeship reform. Do you know what this is, Mr President? It's careful, prudent budgeting. It's recognising there may be expenses that come forward in the future, and you put some away to meet those expenses. That, of course, Mr President, is why our government is able to maintain a AAA credit rating. It's why our government is able to hand down budgets where the deficits are lower than expected. Those opposite when in government, when they announced budgets, they ordinarily had then deficits far greater than what they had forecast. We've come through a pandemic, and what we have done in every year since facing that pandemic at budget updates and this budget is reduce the size of the forecast deficits thanks to our careful management.
Minister, your time has expired. Order. We are not going to go to the question until there's silence. Senator Wong, you're not assisting the chamber. Senator Wong, I have called both sides during this answer. I have called both sides, Senator Wong, in this exchange. I was going to make a comment about how much clearer the chamber was without the barriers, but I'm not so sure anymore. Senator Gallagher.
Thank you, Mr President. I look forward to pursuing these estimates. Minister, in the MyEFO you had $16 billion worth of decisions taken but not yet announced. In this budget, in the final forward estimates years, you have $3 billion worth of cuts to expenditure. Why won't you just be upfront and explain what those cuts are, or are you just trying to get through to the next election?
Minister.
Thanks, Mr President. Well, the thing about the budget is all of the lines of expenditure are there and transparent for the opposition to see. They're there for the opposition to see. Yes, we have taken decisions to reverse out some decisions taken but not yet announced, and to realise some of those decisions, to announce them, to publish them in the budget papers, to make them transparent. Those opposites Mr President, to think that, of course, government shouldn't put away for potentially foreseen expenditure. We think it's prudent to put away for that. It's a bit like, Mr President, what those opposite used to do on commodity prices. Does anybody remember when Mr Swan, who of course is the mentor of Mr Chalmers, the now Shadow Treasurer, when Mr Swan used to take high commodity prices and assumed they'd continue into the future? Little wonder his budgets blew out. We assume commodity prices will come down. Another act of careful, cautious, conservative budgeting.
Minister, your time has expired. Senator Gallagher, a second supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Thank you, Mr President. Minister, wasn't last night's budget nothing more than a pre-election cash splash, only to be followed by secret cuts afterwards?
Minister. Order.
No, Mr President, it is not. This budget represents the economic plan for the future for Australia, an economic plan that has delivered record jobs for Australians, an economic plan that has been built on lower taxes for Australians. Under the Coalition, income taxes are lower than they were under the Labor Party. Under the Coalition, taxes on Australian small businesses are lower than they were under the Labor Party. Under the Coalition, taxes on Australian industry and energy and electricity are lower than they were under the Labor Party. Taxes on housing, retirees, investments are lower than they would have been under the Labor Party. Could we imagine the disaster that would have befallen Australia during COVID-19 if their $386 billion of higher taxes has been applied just at the time when the economy needed opportunities and room for business to grow? Thank God we won the last election, Mr President, and we will paint a clear choice to Australians at the next election.
Senator Wong.
I don't think he can hear you, sir.
I called the minister when his time expired, Senator Wong. Senator Thorpe.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Industry, Science, Energy and Resources. How do you justify pouring millions of public money into polluting offshore gas when we're in a climate emergency? I'm not asking you. Are you the Minister?
Sorry, I'm not in.
I'm not talking to you either.
Senator Thorpe, please. It's not entirely clear at the moment which minister this is being directed at. Is it Minister Mackenzie?
Whoever.
Okay.
Industry, Science and...
The Minister representing the Minister for Industry. Senator
lower
Mackenzie.
emissions. The Minister representing lower emissions have reduced 20%, and we're very proud of that as a nation. There's a lot of countries that talk a big game with respect to lowering emissions, and they actually don't deliver. And on this side of the parliament, we actually focus on delivery and outcomes, not platitudes. We're focused on delivering affordable, reliable energy to support the economy and new jobs. And Australians' competitive advantage has always been based on cheap energy, and gas will be central to our ongoing economic recovery. On this side, we understand that gas is a critical enabler of our economy, which employs so many working-class Australians. For the past decade, the manufacturing sector has depended on gas as its largest source of energy. Gas makes up 42% of manufacturing's total energy use, according to the latest Australian energy statistics. And that is why our gas-fired recovery is so critical. It is a cornerstone in strengthening Australia's sovereign capabilities. You only need to look at what's happening to gas prices in Europe to see the devastation that can occur to the economy when the prices are rising more than 300%. As a result of industry and government working together, we've been able to avoid these international price hikes, with our prices being around 78% lower than prices in Europe, which were trading at over $47 Australian per gigajoule in mid-March. We're taking action to boost the East Coast gas market across the entire supply chain. Through the budget, we're backing 7 priority projects, as well as key carbon capture and storage pipelines, with a $50.3 million investment. Our investment will get local gas to where it's needed to help keep the lights on and homes heated in southern Australia. This will, in our home state, Senator Thorpe of Victoria, it does get quite cold. Having homes heated during winter is important.
Minister, your time has expired. Senator Thorpe, a supplementary question.
In the interest of human life as we know it, will you introduce a moratorium on offshore gas drilling across this country?
Order. Order on my right. Minister.
Well, thank you very much, Mr President. And Senator Thorpe, I've just outlined why it is important to back a gas-led recovery post-COVID, not just for local jobs out in the regions and in our industrial sections of our capital cities, so that working Australians can earn a good wage in high-paying long-term careers, but it is also important that we have a gas-led recovery to ensure that individual Australians and working families can heat their homes at an affordable cost. I tried to outline to you, Senator Thorpe, what the impact of not investing in fuel sources such as gas can have, and you are seeing the implications of that in Europe right now. And you know what, Senator Thorpe? It is not the people who vote for the Greens that are actually affected by these type of things. It is not the inner-city elites on their very high wages that actually have to worry about their housing heating costs.
Your time has expired. Senator Thorpe, a second supplementary question.
Thank you, President. This government is paying to destroy Gunai Sea country, my country, in Gippsland with the Golden Beach fracking project. Where did you get your consent from to frack my country?
Minister.
Thank you very, very much, Mr President. Well, we are very lucky in this country that both state and federal governments over a long period of time have taken very seriously the need to have the right regulatory framework around the development of particularly gas-fired projects.
Order, Minister. On a point of order, Senator Thorpe.
Simple question, President. Who gave you consent to frack
Senator Thorpe.
Stop Gunai country
Senator
as a Gunai
Thorpe.
woman? Who gave you consent?
Senator Thorpe. Senator Thorpe, the minister was being directly relevant to the question. Minister, you have 45 seconds.
So, at both a state and federal level, there are quite strict regulatory controls on both, on a whole range of approvals that must be sought in terms of building these type of projects. But
Minister, Senator Thorpe on a point of order.
I'm a traditional owner of Gunai country. My mother is on the Elders Council.
Senator Thorpe.
Where did you get your consent?
Senator Thorpe, that is not a point of order. Minister, you have 33 seconds. Order. Senator Thorpe. Senator McMahon, Senator Scarr, you're not assisting. Order. Order. Minister, if you wish to make further contribution, you have 27 seconds remaining.
Yes, I would, because I proudly back the resources industry in Australia, including the gas industry, and the tens of thousands of Australians that they employ, hard-working men and women across the length and breadth of this country, and we do not take a backward step. Mr President, I don't appreciate being yelled at.
Minister, Senator Thorpe, is this a point of order?
Absolutely.
What is the point of order,
The
Senator
point
Thorpe?
of order is relevance to my question, And my question is, where did this minister get consent from to drill my country?
Senator Thorpe, you've had a chance to restate your question on 2 occasions. I cannot direct the minister how to answer a question. The minister was being directly relevant to the question. Minister, you have 14 seconds if you wish.
Yes, I do, Mr President. Wish to continue. Without the action that our government is taking to address supply, industry and households will be actually faced with higher prices, disruptions in supply and planned outages, and it is low-income Australians that are going to be most affected.
The time has expired. The time has expired. Senator Thorpe, resume your seat. Senator Thorpe, Senator Henderson.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr President. Thank you, Mr President.
Senator Patterson. Senator Thorpe.
Senator Thorpe.
Senator Thorpe.
If I could just ask my question now, please.
Senator Thorpe. Senator Thorpe.
Mr.
Senator Thorpe. Senator Davey. Senator Davey on the point of order.
Yep.
Sorry,
Chair. My point of order is just I would like to carry on with question time. There are other people who have questions, and these continual interruptions are not conducive. It's disorderly conduct in the Senate.
Senator Thorpe, you had a chance to ask your question. The question was answered by the minister. Senator Thorpe, we must proceed with question time. Senator Henderson, you have the call.
Thank you very much, Mr President. My question is to the Minister representing the Deputy Prime Minister, Senator Mackenzie. Can the minister outline how the Liberal and National government plan outlined in last night's budget will deliver a stronger future for regional Australia?
Sorry, I wasn't sure how the question was directed, but I know it was to Minister Mackenzie. Please, Minister, you have the call.
Well, thank you very much, Mr President. Thank you, Senator Henderson, for your question and the way you champion our home state in the regions in Victoria. This is an historic budget for the regions, one that reflects our government and my party's paramount belief that this nation's future prosperity is inextricably linked to the health and wealth and opportunity that exists in our regions. The budget builds on the $100 billion since 2013 that we have already made as a government in infrastructure, digital connectivity, health and education. As the Treasurer stated last night, no government has invested more in our regions than this Liberal National Coalition. And last night we announced an unprecedented $2 billion regional accelerator program that is open to regional centres across the country that have the ambition and plan to grow, seek to overcome challenges and seize new opportunities that this decade will see. It will take a place-based, locally driven, data-focused approach, enlisting the private sector to drive catalytic, transformative economic growth in areas such as manufacturing, education, supply chains, export opportunities and industry development. From Mount Gambier and Devonport to Mildura or Mackay, if these regional centres want to strengthen and grow their local economy and secure a stronger future, this $2 billion program will be available for this purpose. I look forward to prospective councils and regions coming forward with their plans and projects that will create local jobs and build on their own unique local assets. The centrepiece of the Regional Accelerator program, which will be open from the 1st of July, is the $500 million Regionalisation Fund, which will deliver opportunities for individual regions to define and invest in their own ambitions for growth. It is intended that the Regionalisation Fund will provide for larger grants of, say, $10 million or more for transformational projects which will support long-term economic growth and job creation in the regions.
Your time has expired. Senator Henderson, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Minister. Can the minister outline how this budget will grow and strengthen regional communities?
Minister.
Thank you, Senator. As I was saying, from Mount Gambier to Mildura, from Dubbo to Devonport, new budget initiatives such as our $2 billion Regional Accelerator program will provide strategic investment to our regions and transform them. Examples on how the Regional Accelerator program will unlock those transformative opportunities is our a regionally focused 2 rounds of our modern manufacturing initiatives to the tune of $500 million, so that those regional centres right across the country that see their ambition as being an industrial heartland and centre will have the support to make that happen. We're putting $200 million towards the regional stream of the Supply Chain Resilience Initiative, which will encourage businesses to build resilience across our supply chain, a fragility that was exposed during COVID-19. And we're putting $118 million on the table for regional universities to boost prioritised research and development with industry partners through a regionally focused Trailblazers program.
Your time has expired. Senator Henderson, a second supplementary.
Can the minister explain the risks to regional jobs, families and businesses if regional Australia is not supported by strong, long-term investments?
Minister. Order. Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr President. This budget sees the largest investment in rural and regional Australia in our nation's history, and it is the Liberal National Government of this generation that's delivered it. Those opposite, the Leader of the Opposition couldn't even hardly bring himself to mention the word regions in his National Press Club address recently. They do not have a plan or the policy initiatives to actually drive economic growth in the regions. We're seeing a transformation of population shift post-COVID. A lot more Australians are actually recognising that to live in a community where you know your neighbour, you can have a great local job and a prosperous future is out with rural and regional Australians. But it's not going to be those opposite that come to the table with any plan to develop that future. I'm going to be keenly interested in seeing what Mr Albanese delivers tomorrow night and how he focuses on the economic growth opportunities in rural and regional. But we know it's only our side of government that has the region's backs.
Your time has expired. Sorry, Senator Chisholm, just before we go to you, I do wish to draw the attention of honourable senators to the presence in the gallery of a delegation from Papua New Guinea, led by the Minister for Communication and Information Technology, the Honourable Timothy Masiu. Masiu, I hope I've got that right. On behalf of all senators, I wish you a warm welcome to Australia and in particular to the Senate. Senator Chisholm.
Thanks, Mr President. My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Birmingham. 11 days ago, the Queensland Government wrote to the Prime Minister asking for assistance with Queensland's flood clean-up and rebuilding effort. But last night's budget announced nothing to help Queensland. Why has the Prime Minister once again turned his back on Queenslanders?
Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. And look, I thank Senator Chisholm for the question, albeit I think the continued efforts to play politics with tragic and terrible natural disasters is at the very least unbecoming in terms of the way the opposition approach it. Mr President, firstly let me place on record all of our thoughts for those affected by recent natural disasters across Australia. The loss of life, the loss of property, the impacts that has had upon so many Australians, in particular across parts of New South Wales, South East Queensland, especially most intently in the Northern Rivers parts of New South Wales, but those losses being felt across many regions are real. They have a devastating impact on families, on businesses and require significant reconstruction efforts. Mr President, in response to those disasters, our government has provided extensive assistance and support to date. We have provided, Mr President, more than 1 million payments that have been made to families across New South Wales and Queensland in support of their immediate needs and assistance. We have provided the initial activation in relation to disaster assistance support across New South Wales and Queensland. And contrary to the question that was asked and the assertion suggesting, Mr President, that there was not coverage in last night's budget, in fact last night's budget provided more than $6 billion of support for natural disaster assistance response across New South Wales and Queensland. Parts of that response, which I know Senator Watt knows and he's just playing politics with it, is essentially a demand-driven response in elements of Category A and Category B funding, that we will continue to provide for repair of roads, repair of bridges, repair of infrastructure, critical support to those communities.
Minister. Senator Chisholm, a supplementary question.
Thanks, Mr President. And it's not politics to highlight incompetence, which is what we are doing.
Order.
It has been 20 days since Mr Morrison announced that his government would provide flood victims in the electorate of Page with assistance payments of $3,000 each. Thousands of homes across south-east Queensland were also devastated, yet Mr Morrison has only provided Queensland flood victims with assistance payments of $1,000 each. Why does Mr Morrison think flood victims in New South Wales are worth more than 3 times as much as those in Queensland?
Minister.
Mr. President, this is very sad and shallow politicking from those opposite, who seem to have decided to turn a blind eye to the facts of the circumstance. The facts of the circumstances around a 1 in 500-year flood event of such magnitude and natural disaster, the likes of which communities have not seen before in relation to what has occurred in those parts of the Northern Rivers districts of New South Wales. Whilst all of these disasters are a terrible tragedy for the communities involved, the intensity, the severity of that flood disaster in New South Wales, as acknowledged, for example, by former Governor-General Peter Cosgrove and others, was the likes of which we have not seen before. So, for those opposite to seemingly begrudge the additional assistance provided to those in the Northern Rivers district is really quite unbecoming, quite unfair, and it is just nothing but cheap politics.
Minister. Senator Chisholm, a
We can see where the cheap politics is coming from. 1 month on from the floods, Gympie residents are still living in tents and being forced to bathe outside after their houses have been deemed uninhabitable. Why has the Morrison government abandoned flood victims in Gympie?
Minister.
Well, Mr. President, it has not, and indeed in Queensland, Mr. President, in Queensland, some 307,045 payments and grants have been made. In Gympie, that is 8,883 to date, according to the advice that I have. Now, the support does not stop there. The support does not stop there, Senator Watt, and the way in which you prey on the vulnerable, the way in which you prey on those who have lost, the way in which you seek to achieve political capital at the expense of people facing natural disaster is disgusting.
Senator Chisholm, on a point of order.
On relevance, this specifically went to those people abandoned in Gympie, of which I have been to and talked to those people. For the Minister to treat them that way is absolutely appalling. They're living in tents.
Senator Chisholm, that's not a point of order. Minister, you have 18 seconds remaining.
Mr. President, we will continue to work under the established disaster guidelines, providing billions of dollars of support into Queensland and to New South Wales in response to these floods, but we won't seek to undertake the type of political grandstanding of those opposite at the expense of the vulnerable.
Senator Askew.
Thank you, Mr. President. My question is to the Minister for Women's Safety, Senator Ruston. Can the Minister update the Senate on how the Liberal and Nationals government's budget is delivering on our commitment to end family, domestic and sexual violence?
The Minister for Women's Safety, Senator Ruston.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and thank Senator Askew for her ongoing interest on what is a very important issue for every single Australian. Well, in last night's budget, we made an announcement, an historic $1.3 billion of new funding to bring and for new investments to women's safety initiatives. This brings our commitment to the first action plan under the National Plan to end violence against women and children in this country to $2.5 billion. The development of the next National Plan has been the culmination of many, many months of consultation with advocates, with victim survivors, with service providers, with researchers and other experts across the whole of Australia to make sure that we had the most input and engagement we could. Because we know for the next National Plan to succeed, we must listen, we must engage and we must get this right. That's why the plan has been informed, importantly, by contributions by people who have lived experience of family, domestic and sexual violence, which we have managed to gather that information through forums such as the 2021 National Summit on women's safety, as well as surveys, targeted consultations, interviews and public comments that we have sought throughout the process. And the voices and experiences of victim survivors are absolutely essential when we design the programs and when we deliver the programs, because we need to ensure that our programs are designed and delivered in a trauma-informed way. Importantly, our investment spans the entire life cycle of domestic violence. We need to deal with prevention, early intervention, response and recovery, because if we are to end gender-based violence, we must address all areas. The Women's Safety Package included $22.2 million towards prevention initiatives, including supporting Our Watch. It included $328.2 million for early intervention, as well as $480 million for response.
Senator Askew, a supplementary question.
Thank you. Minister, in what further ways is the government investing in recovery measures to end violence against women and their children?
Minister.
Mr President, well, listening to victim survivors and people with lived experience has actually reaffirmed what we already know, and that is trauma stays with people unless it's addressed. And we must ensure that people who are suffering trauma get access to the right supports beyond the crisis response. That's over months, years and sometimes lifetimes. Our historic $290 million commitment to recovery measures in yesterday's budget sets out a path to ensure that victim survivors are supported so that they can rebuild their lives, participate in their workforce and participate in their community. We're particularly targeting and committing $48.7 million to provide targeted trauma-informed mental health therapies and helping survivors navigate the healthcare system. Seeking justice must not add to the trauma, and survivors must be supported to work through their trauma sooner, guided by their own goals, and that is why we're spending $87.9 to expand the Lighthouse project.
Senator Askew, a second supplementary.
Thank you. And how is the government keeping women and children safe when they do make the brave decision to leave a violent relationship?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr President. Well, our government is absolutely committed to breaking down the barriers to women when they leave a violent relationship. Yesterday we announced an additional $240 million extension to the Escaping Violence payment, which provides women up to $5,000 to help them establish a life free from violence. This will support another 37,000 women who've made that incredibly brave decision to leave a violent relationship. We've also committed an additional $100 million to build emergency accommodation, because we know the most important thing on that day that you make that brave decision is to have a safe place to go, a roof over your head where you can start to rebuild your life and get back on your feet. We're also providing $54.6 million to support women and children staying in their own homes when it's safe to do so, through planning, personal safety, etc. And this helps women and children remain in their communities, in their schools without disruption, and ensures perpetrators are punished and not the victim.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Cox.
Thank you. My question is to the Minister representing the Treasurer, Senator Birmingham. Yesterday, the Morrison government handed down a budget that makes housing more expensive, locks in tax cuts for the wealthy and funds more coal and gas projects. Minister, as the climate crisis ravages our country, how can you stand by a budget that provides more than $38 billion in handouts to coal, oil and gas corporations, but cuts climate spending by 35%?
The Minister representing the Treasurer, Senator Birmingham.
Thanks very much, Mr President. Well, Mr President, there was quite a bit in terms of that question, but I'll try to deal first and foremost specifically with the questions that Senator Cox posed at the end of her commentary there. Mr President, it's incorrect to assert, as she did in relation to climate expenditure, the government's investment in relation to achieving net zero, continuing to drive down emissions from the 20% reduction that Australia has achieved to date, and continuing to invest in areas of low emissions technology is real. In this budget alone, building on top of our previous low emissions strategies and commitments, in this budget alone there's new funding for microgrids in rural and regional communities to take them off of diesel-powered generation to give them both cleaner and cheaper electricity for the future. In this budget alone, Mr President, there is of course the patent box reforms I've already referenced to ensure that clean energy, low emissions technologies developed in Australia are actually commercialised in Australia, to make sure that we seize the advantage. And all of this is building on the fact in this budget too there's more money for hydrogen, for ensuring that the hydrogen hubs our government is seeking to develop and invest in that industry also supports the development of demand for hydrogen, to ensure all aspects of the supply chain for hydrogen are supported, Mr President. So this is very strong. Now, in terms of the claims about subsidies that Senator Cox has made, and this is a common refrain from the Australian Greens, where when you dig down, what they're actually talking about are the diesel fuel tax rebates. That's the subsidies they're talking about, which are essentially tax rebates provided to businesses in Australia, to those in the resources sector, to Australian farmers as well, tax rebates in relation to their business expenses. That's not an uncommon thing. It's certainly not a subsidy in terms of their operations. These are some of the biggest taxpayers in Australia, some of the biggest contributors to our economy in terms of jobs and revenue, and from that support for climate action, for example.
Minister, your time has expired. Senator Cox, a supplementary question.
Thank you. This budget fails to fix the housing crisis. Minister, do you acknowledge that there is $13 billion for property investors in the form of negative gearing and capital gains tax concession, but no new money for affordable housing in this budget? Shame.
Order. Minister.
Mr President, no, I don't acknowledge that, Mr President, because I don't agree with it. There's in fact $2 billion extra in this budget for the National Housing Finance and Investment Corporation, $2 billion of additional support to help them with the low-cost financing that NIFIC provides through community housing providers to support social and affordable housing. But this is also a budget, Mr President, in which we proudly build upon our track record as parties in government of supporting first home ownership. We are proud from the very foundation of the Liberal and National parties to have always supported first home ownership. And the first home guarantee that our government has introduced is helping tens of thousands of young Australians to get into their first home sooner than would have been the case, to stop paying rent, to start paying off a house, to have the economic and financial security that comes with owning your own home, and we are incredibly proud of that achievement.
Senator Cox, a second supplementary question.
If you're a low or middle income earner, this budget gives you a once-off $420 bonus, but under the Stage 3 tax cuts, a millionaire will get an extra $9,000, not once, not twice, but each and every year. Why is the lining of pockets of millionaires more important than helping ordinary Australians with the cost of living?
Minister.
Well, Mr President, Senator Cox, you mentioned Stage 3 tax cuts. Of course, they're Stage 3 because we've already delivered Stage 1 and Stage 2. And Stage 1 and Stage 2 prioritise low and middle income Australians first and foremost. Now, I know that if we have a change of government, heaven forbid, at the next election, it won't matter whether you're a low-income Australian or a high-income Australian, you'll end up paying higher taxes. You'll end up paying higher taxes, which is evidenced from the fact that every one of Senator Cox's questions was about putting more tax on some of Australia's biggest income earners, more tax in relation to Australian property owners, more tax in relation to Australian workers. What you can see there is the Greens, if they have the ability to hold as they will the Labor Party, hold them to things in government, then the Australian Greens will be pushing for more taxes on Australian wages, more taxes on Australian housing, more taxes on Australian industry, and they will leave Australia far worse off.
Senator Marielle-Smith.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister for Finance, Senator Birmingham. Can the minister confirm that of the $7.1 billion allocated in the budget to regional areas, none will be spent in South Australia?
The Minister. Order. Order. Senator Farrell. Senator Farrell. The Minister for Finance, Senator Birmingham.
Well, thanks very much, and thank you, Senator Smith, for the question in which you seem to have assumed that there's only one measure in the budget papers relating to regional Australia, when in fact there are many measures in the budget papers relating to regional Australia. Yes, Mr. President, there is one measure that is particularly focusing on resource and energy hubs and providing investment in terms of infrastructure and spending in those resource and energy hubs. But there is also support, Mr. President, in other ways for regional Australia. $2 billion of the Regional Acceleration Program that Senator McKenzie was speaking of before, which will help ensure that whether it is across manufacturing or the skills agenda or exporters from regional South Australia, they will have a greater opportunity in relation to accessing those areas of regional funding. In relation to the infrastructure spending, Mr. President, I've noticed commentary, Mr. President, I've noticed commentary in non-South Australian media, in the Financial Review or elsewhere, suggesting that South Australia is receiving a disproportionate share of infrastructure spending. In fact, up to 17% of new infrastructure commitments going into South Australia, Mr. President. So you've got to be careful when you start trying to pick and choose in those regards, because what we've seen in relation to delivery of the North-South corridor, in relation to investment in the South East Freeway, in relation to support for the Horrocks Highway, is that in South Australia there is a surge in relation to infrastructure spending and investment supporting SA. And of course, Mr. President, then in terms of our government, there is perhaps the most significant impact for South Australia, which is what we have done to turn around defence industry investment, Mr. President. Those opposite, Mr. President, who commissioned 0 vessels when they were in government. 0 vessels in terms of naval shipbuilding versus on this side 70 vessels as part of a strategy supporting SA and WA.
Senator Smith, a supplementary question.
Last month, Liberal MP for Barker, Tony Passon, blasted this government, saying that South Australians in the southeast of the state had felt, and I quote, kicked in the guts and re-traumatised more than 2 years after they were forgotten in the Black Summer bushfires. Why does the Morrison government keep turning its back on regional South Australians?
Minister. Order.
Well, Mr. President, I do not accept the premise of that question at all. Mr. President, I just went through a number of the areas of investment for South Australia. And, Mr. President, in terms of generating further wealth for regional communities in South Australia, you need look, for example, only at one of our major manufacturing investments that we have announced and made. The new investment in plant protein will ensure that South Australian grains and legumes producers have the opportunity not just to be exporters of their grains or legumes to the world, but to benefit from value-adding, to actually have a manufacturing industry that invests in higher value products, generating more for our farmers, more for our regional communities. It's not just that investment in roads, it's not just that investment in other infrastructure, it is of course also that creation of new industries across SA which are making sure it will be stronger into the future.
Senator Smith, a second supplementary question.
Senator, as Mr Passon said, during the bushfires, South Australians in the southeast felt forgotten, they felt kicked in the guts when they missed out on support. Now they've missed out on the $7.1 billion in regional spending. Even when your own Liberal colleagues call out the Morrison government for re-traumatising, forgetting and kicking South Australians in the guts, why should South Australians feel any different?
Minister.
Well, Mr President, South Australians should have confidence that in relation to what our government has done in supporting SA, in investing in defence, in investing in infrastructure, in supporting regions, has made a fundamental difference in terms of job creation, in terms of economic opportunities. South Australians, like all Australians, are paying lower taxes thanks to our government. South Australian businesses, small businesses, are paying lower taxes thanks to our government. South Australians, indeed, like those across the national electricity market, are paying lower electricity prices thanks to our government. Let's just take that, for example, Mr President. That electricity price averages, when the Labor Party was last in office, grew by 12.9%. But under our government, we've brought that back to 0.4% throughout the life of our government, or indeed a reduction of 8% over the last 2 years. That means if you're in SA or elsewhere across the NEM, you get the opportunity as a rural or regional person or anybody else for more cost-effective living and business.
Senator Small.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Employment, Workforce, Skills, Small and Family Business, as well as a proud Western Australian, Senator Cash. Minister, how will this Liberal National Government's plan, as outlined in last night's budget, help Australian small and family businesses who already provide more than 4 in 10 Australian jobs to create more jobs for Australians and secure a stronger economic future for this country?
The Minister representing the Minister for Employment, Senator Cash.
Thank you, Mr President, and I thank Senator Small for the question. And as always, I acknowledge Senator Small as one of those people who does employ Australians, who runs a small business, Small's Bar, down in Bunbury in Western Australia. And Senator Small, you're on the coalition side of politics, so you understand that small and family business, they are the backbone of the Australian community. They are the heart of our local communities. They employ nearly 8 million Australians. And Mr President, currently in Australia we have more people in work than ever before. We have more people in work now than we did before COVID-19. And of course a lot of that has to do with the growth of small business in this country. When you look at how small businesses themselves, they embraced the policies that the coalition government put in place throughout COVID-19. Employment in small business has grown by around 10% since the beginning of the pandemic. That just shows you how resilient the small businesses in Australia are, and in particular, Mr President, where Senator Small comes from, in Bunbury in Western Australia, how resilient those small businesses are in rural and regional Australia. And last night, what did the government do? Well, we backed small and family businesses ever further. They are already benefiting from the lowest tax rate in 50 years and record investment incentives under the coalition government. That is a stark contrast, Mr President, to what those on the other side offer. Under the other side, they were paying a tax rate of 30%. They are currently paying a tax rate of 25%. That is the lowest tax rate in 50 years. But last night, we invested further, and in particular, we have invested a tax rebate, a tax deduction, a $120 tax deduction they will get by investing in upskilling their workforce. For every $100 a small business spends on training their employees, they will get a $120 tax deduction back.
Has expired. Senator Small, a supplementary question.
Minister Cash, in light of that outlining of achievements for small and family businesses in Australia, doing what they do best, creating jobs, employing Australians and training Australians for future jobs, how is this a budget delivered by the Liberal National Government that can ensure Australia's small and family businesses continue to do what they do best, unimpeded by red tape, with easier access to support from this government that understands their needs?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr President. And again, Senator Small, he understands small business, so he understands that, in particular, investing in his workforce, in the skilled workforce, that ensures that small businesses are able to prosper, to grow and to create more jobs for Australians. Senator Small also understands, though, how important it is for the government to invest in small businesses so that they can embrace the digital revolution. And, Mr President, you saw it again last night, the coalition government further investing in the capacity and the growth of small business. From budget night, every $100 these small businesses spend on digital technologies like cloud computing, we know how important that is, e-invoicing, cybersecurity and web design, that will now see them get a $120 tax deduction. That again is getting them into where we need them to be, the digital age. But also, Mr President, what we are focused on is cutting as much red tape as we can for small business, because when you cut red tape, they prosper, they grow, they create more jobs for Australians.
Senator Small, a second supplementary.
Thank you, Mr President. And we've heard a lot from Minister Cash on I guess, the strengths of Australia's small and family businesses in providing those jobs and taking up the support that they get from this government to support the investment that underpins the jobs. But the real question that faces this chamber, and indeed the people of Australia very shortly, is what are the risks to those jobs and economic opportunities if our small and family businesses in this country are not supported by a government that wants to see them prosper and grow?
Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr President. I think it's pretty obvious on this side of the chamber what the greatest risk to small and family business is, and that is, of course, an Albanese Labor government. Why? Because the closest most of them have ever come to a small business is to proudly close it down. That is unacceptable behaviour, Mr President, unacceptable behaviour. And when it comes to taxes, there's only one way that those on the other side go, Mr President, and that is up. It is in their DNA. With us on this side, we know that for small businesses, the best thing you can do for them is to lower their taxes. And that is why, under the coalition government, they are paying the lowest tax rate, tax rate, Mr President, in 50 years. And then you look at the alternative Prime Minister. You look at the alternative Prime Minister.
Minister. Sorry, before I come to you, Senator Patrick, I will ask those on my right. That was getting excessive in terms of the noise. Senator Patrick?
I was just going to raise a point of order. I couldn't hear any of the minister's answer.
I was struggling myself, Senator Patrick, and that's something to say when it's Senator Cash on her feet. Senator Cash, you have 16 seconds.
Thank you, Mr President. As I said, when it comes to lowering taxes, that is in the DNA of the coalition government. The DNA of the coalition government. We lower taxes, you raise taxes. We look at small business and we say you deserve more of what you earn and we will give it back. You, on the other hand—
Sorry, we did have a little error with the timing there. So, no. Sadly, Minister Cash, your time had actually— Your time had actually expired. Senator Keneally, were you on that issue?
I was actually seeking the call for the next question.
Senator Keneally.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Veterans Affairs and Defence Personnel, Senator Payne. Yesterday, Minister G told the House that there was $96 million in the budget to clear up a backlog of veterans' compensation claims. Can this minister tell the House in which budget paper and on what page that $96 million can be found?
Oh, no. Minister representing the Minister for Veterans Affairs, Senator Payne.
Thank you very much, Mr President, and I thank Senator Keneally for her question. I don't have that budget paper with me, Senator Keneally, but I will note that this government has, and I will take that on notice, therefore, but I will note that this government invests over $11.5 billion each year to support veterans and their families, 336,000 veterans and their family. Mr President, I'm seeking to respond to what I regarded as, perhaps mistakenly, a serious question from those opposite. If it is not possible to respond to that question by indicating that I will take it on notice and I will return to the chamber and to provide Senator Keneally with further information, then I'll decline to answer the question any further.
Senator Keneally, a supplementary question.
On the weekend, Minister G threatened to resign if he did not receive the $96 million in the budget. He labelled the 60,000 unprocessed claims within his department a national disgrace. Why does it take a minister speaking up publicly and threatening to quit for Mr Morrison to take responsibility? And where is this $96 million?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr President. And I absolutely reject the propositions put by Senator Keneally in her question. As a government, we've invested over $500 million to implement substantial changes to the Department of Veterans Affairs processes and their technology, making it both easier and faster for veterans and their families to access both services and support.
We've seen the number of claims received by DVA double, in fact more than double, over the last 3 financial years. And that, of course, requires additional resourcing to manage, and that's exactly what the Australian government is doing. This budget has provided an initial $22.8 million, which will fund 90 extra staff to address that backlog of unprocessed claims. And it will be followed by a further investment to continue to improve the veteran claims processing system and to reduce waiting times. Mr President, as a nation, we have looked very closely at the support we provide to veterans and their families in this country. I want to acknowledge each and every one of them for their service and their families for supporting them as well.
Your time has expired. Senator Keneally, a second supplementary.
Thank you. When asked why it took Minister Gee threatening to resign for his government to provide the necessary funding, Mr Morrison said, and I quote, "I wouldn't agree with that assessment. Given the $96 million required to get through the 60,000 unprocessed claims appears nowhere in these budget papers, isn't it just the latest example of Mr Morrison not telling the truth to the Australian people and to his own colleagues?"
Order. Minister.
President, and unsurprisingly, Senator Keneally is absolutely fundamentally wrong. But I'm from New South Wales, so I'm used to that. And the people of the electorate she's going to purport to represent at the next election are going to have to get used to that too, Mr President. But to be absolutely clear and in the absence of any facts from the other side, Mr President, let me—
Minister, please resume your seat. Senator Wong on a point of order.
On a point of order, Mr President, there is no universe in which that contribution was directly relevant to the question. And I'd ask you—
Order in the chamber.
So I'd ask you to remind the Minister of the question.
Senator Wong. Minister, I will on the point of order.
I began by saying in my response to Senator Keneally's supplementary question that she was absolutely and fundamentally wrong. That is completely pertinent to the question.
So order. Senator Wong. Senator Wong, I've allowed you to bring the minister back to the question. Minister, you have 45 seconds remaining if you wish to add anything further.
Thank you very much, Mr President. And I do wish to indicate that in addition to the funding I've already discussed and the funding provided in the 21-22 budget of over $137 million, there is also a total increase of 447 APS positions across the DVA, taking the staff to over 2,000 Australian public service staff. The additional funding and the average staffing level received through this budget will be used to recruit additional APS staff, both ongoing and non-ongoing, across DVA. In the claims processing area, this will take into account that absolute requirement to reduce the backlog about which Minister Gee has been so committed over 2 years and ensure appropriate staff are available to maintain claims processing at a normal rate into the future, as is required.
Your time has expired. Minister Birmingham.
Mr President, I ask that further questions be placed on notice. Mr President, I also seek leave, as foreshadowed at the commencement of question time, to move a motion relating to the hours of meeting and the routine of business for today.
Is leave granted? There being no objection, leave is granted.
Mr President, I move the motion as circulated, and as indicated in my earlier contributions indicate that the motion does contain provisions for the consideration of the disallowance motion at the request of the Australian Greens, and I also understand also for the consideration of an aged care bill at the request of Senator Patrick.
So the question is that motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion say aye. Against say no. The ayes have it. So, as a result of the passing of that motion, we will move immediately to a condolence motion. It is with deep regret that I inform the Senate of the death on the 26th of February 2022 of the Honourable Moses Henry Moss Cass, a former minister and member of the House of Representatives for the division of Maribyrnong, Victoria, from 1969 to 1983.